Greg's hangover has many causes. The fluid lost from his system has left his brain dehydrated. His blood is full of toxins produced by his liver as it breaks down the alcohol. His higher brain has started to function again. And it's just beginning to appreciate what his primitive brain drove him to last night.
What the hell are you doing here?
Oh.
Did you follow me home?
No. No, I was trying... Yeah. I got you these.
So you remember us kissing?
Yeah, of course.
And you don't regret it?
No.
You look like you could do with a coffee. You better come inside.
Courtship takes many forms. For a male Australian rifle bird, it has an intense, hypnotic quality. Kayapo Indians of the Amazon paint their faces and perform together in an unabashed display. For this Argentinian couple, courtship is expressed in a dance so sensual it was once outlawed. For all species, mating requires a partner, and finding a partner means advertising your intentions and your best qualities. Something we all do in one form or another. From the largest mammals to the smallest bacteria, every creature must satisfy an instinct to reproduce. When we think of sex, we think of having sex, which is only natural, given the pleasure and comfort we receive from it. Yet for nearly all creatures, sex exists for only one reason, to reproduce. And even then, it doesn't always require a male and a female. For hermaphrodite earthworms with both male and female sex organs, there are no sexes at all. Dandelions are asexual. They produce seeds that are identical clones. There's no need for pollen or bees. This virgin green fly is giving birth to offspring already pregnant with their own young. A clone wastes no time competing for a mate or having sex once one has been found. And since everyone can reproduce, populations grow quickly. If producing cloned offspring is so easy, why do it any other way? Geneticist John Maynard Smith is one of the world's leading theorists on why sex evolved.
Sex is very puzzling indeed. I mean, we tend to think of sex and reproduction as going together, as they do in our own species, but they are, at a fundamental level, precisely the opposite of one another. Reproduction is one cell turning into two, and sex is two cells turning into one. And why should two cells turn into one?
One reason why two cells turn into one is genes. Sex enables us to pass genes on to future generations and to mix the genes of males and females. All living things are constructed from the blueprints provided by genes. And as one cell divides into two, two become four, and eventually 1 trillion or more join together to make a human baby. Each follows a set of instructions reprinted inside every cell.
In higher organisms like higher plants, higher animals, there's a fusion of a large egg with a tiny sperm. And it's only when you get that sort of division of labor between a large egg and a small sperm that it becomes costly to one of the partners. It's not costly to the male. He produces millions of very cheap sperm. It is, in a sense, costly to the female. She's throwing away a complete set of her own genes, if you like, and replacing them by a set of male. You can almost think the male is being kind of parasitic on the female in a way.
Producing offspring is not a job males and females share equally. It takes 9 months to reach this one extraordinary moment, and only a female, at least among our species, can make it possible. She contributes an egg thousands of times bigger than the sperm that's fertilized it, and a body to feed and shelter the growing embryo. And now, she must bear the pain of pushing it out. Sexual creatures pay a price. Having two sexes means a female olive baboon has only half of the troop's fertile adults to choose from when it comes time for her to mate. As for the male, if he wants to be selected, he must invest time proving his worthiness. Time which might be better spent looking for food or avoiding becoming someone else's meal. Despite these drawbacks, the drive to reproduce is all-consuming. When praying mantis mate, the smaller male enters into a union which could be his last. After copulation is complete, the female often seizes the male in a vice-like grip and slowly devours him. Male Atelopus frogs don't die for sex, although being locked in a sexual embrace that lasts as long as 6 months can be detrimental. While they don't actually copulate the entire time, the smaller male sacrifices everything in the process, giving up his freedom, even losing weight. Why do they do it? Matt Ridley is author of The Red Queen, Sex and the Evolution of Human Nature.
The goal of males is to exploit females to produce their offspring, and the goal of females is to exploit males to invest in their offspring. Exploitation is one way of looking at it. Another way is to look at it as a cooperative venture, but there's an element of both cooperation and exploitation in sexual relationships throughout nature.
If sex is such an unreasonable business, why did it evolve? A common theory is that sex purges bad mutations, enabling a species to clean up its genes, so to speak. Yet many scientists argue that isn't enough to explain why sex has persisted over billions of years. There had to be something more, a force so invasive and so persistent that sex was the only way of controlling it. For a time, scientists thought adaptation was the reason. After all, every living thing had evolved characteristics which helped it survive. Cheetahs and antelopes both developed speed and agility, one for hunting, the other for getting away. But was a cheetah the greatest threat to an antelope's survival, and the reason why it needed sex to adapt?
Most of the enemies that animals and plants confront in everyday life, the most powerful enemies they confront are parasites, not predators. Attacks from within and by smaller creatures. Certainly in the case of us, it's obvious that the disease and parasitic attack is a very common and major problem for us still, and has been throughout most of our history, whereas being eaten by lions and tigers is a small part of the problem. That puts the species under continual pressure to come up with solutions to the problem of parasites and disease.
Was one of those solutions sex? Curtis Lively and a team of researchers at Indiana University are evolutionary biologists studying the relationship between sex and parasites. His work centers around a common variety of freshwater snails found in New Zealand.
Some of these snails are clonal and some of them are sexual. And what we want to know is why. Why is there this mixture of sexual and clonal females? And in particular, what we wonder is why the clonal females don't completely replace the sexual females.
These New Zealand scaup offered an important clue. Lively noticed that wherever the ducks gathered to feed, the snails living in the water below reproduced sexually. Yet in deeper waters, where ducks rarely traveled, the snails were clonal. Each produced identical copies of itself. Researchers needed to find the link between ducks and snails. Under the microscope, the reason became clear. Snails living among the sexual populations were being infected with parasites. Parasites commonly carried by ducks. With as many as 1,500 parasite cysts invading their bodies, the snails needed a strategy for survival.
If there's a high risk of parasitism, the best strategy that the females can adopt is cross-fertilization. And the only way they can do that is through sexual reproduction. The advantage of sexual reproduction is that all your offspring are different from you and different from each other, which makes them, under this theory, less likely to be infected in the next generation. Whereas if you're clonal, all your offspring are just like you, they're just like each other. If one gets infected, they're all likely to be infected, and you could lose all your offspring.
Sex may enable all of us to mix our genes and outmaneuver our parasites, but the gains are only temporary. Malaria is humanity's oldest scourge, and despite 1 million years of evolution, it continues to be the world's leading infectious disease. Inside the gut of a female mosquito, the reason becomes apparent. Malaria parasites also engage in sex and produce offspring which are capable of untangling the defenses we create by mixing our genes. Zoologist William Hamilton of Oxford University is most often credited with making the connection between parasites and sexual reproduction.
race between hosts and parasites goes on all the time, unremittingly, possibly goes on even more fiercely as we as a species become more dominant on the planet, because microbes like nothing better than organisms who are living close together and are similar, and they can spread from one to the other ever more easily. So I think the circumstances that I describe as selecting for sexuality certainly apply very strongly today, even to humans. But the general idea is that they apply to all organisms, animals, plants, things as small as amoebae. Everything is subject to this ongoing struggle to keep up with its parasites.
Bonobos, or pygmy chimps of central Zaire, are our nearest living relatives. We share more than 98% of the same genes. And like us, bonobos are sexual animals. But when it comes to sexual habits, ours seem prudish. Bonobos engage freely in all sorts of positions and in every partner combination imaginable. For a female wiretail mannequin, mating is a much more discriminating affair. Courtship begins with a dance, which she observes closely. In the end, her choice will depend on the stiffness of his tail feathers. For all sexual creatures, finding a mate and nurturing offspring are fundamental to the survival of the species. In fact, it may be these two essential tasks which define male and female. It's believed sex originated billions of years ago between cells of equal size. But as time went on, it became impossible for each cell to be both rich in nutrients and mobile. What evolved may explain the differences we now see between sperm and eggs. Each became a specialist. Eggs, rich in nutrients, took on the nurture function, and sperm, small and plentiful, specialized in mate finding. These two roles, the consequence of finding a mate and raising offspring, could explain some of the physical and behavioral differences between females and males.
It tends to be the case that females are more choosy than males. And the reason is because if you think about a normal, typical mammal like ourselves, the female is going to invest 9 months in producing the baby, several years in nurturing it. After that, the male can produce a baby in 3 minutes, in a sense. I mean, that's all it takes for him to put his genes into a situation where they can become a new individual. Therefore, males can always go for quantity, and females are always going to be much more interested in quality.
How do females select the best quality males? That may depend on what she needs most. A female Australian lyrebird moves from one territory to another, assessing each male according to the splendor of his plumes and the complexity of his song. Because he's a great mimic, an experienced male can duplicate the songs of most other birds living in his territory. But why should looks or vocal repertoire matter? A male jacana doesn't display or sing, but he is a good father, which is exactly what the female jacana is after. In a reversal of roles, it is she who mates with several males, while he is left to raise a brood of chicks. Jacana chicks can feed themselves and walk at birth, and although they're not quite big enough to stride across lily pads, they are big enough to be a tempting snack for a crocodile. Fortunately, the male jacana has a special talent few other birds can manage. When he reaches the chicks, he literally scoops them up into his breast down. Then he makes his getaway. It's believed females favor males who are the most resourceful or the most beautiful because these traits provide information about his quality and, fundamentally, about his genes. And females who obtain the best genes produce better offspring, which means, over millions of years of evolution, their preferences become instinct. But what about males? What happens to them when females choose the same traits generation after generation?
Well, one of the interesting things is that if females are choosing their sexual partner, they act rather like a cattle breeder or a dog breeder in choosing which individuals to breed from. And if females start choosing in one direction, they start choosing one particular characteristic, then they will gradually over time exaggerate that characteristic in the males. And that's how you end up with something like a peacock's tail.
On little more than a 1-meter patch of grass, a male peacock advertises his willingness to mate. Whether or not he succeeds depends entirely on how well he stands up to the competition. This market-like display of males is known as a lek. For years, Oxford biologist Marion Petrie has puzzled over why peahens choose their mates this way.
Peahens will come onto the lek where there are several males displaying in close proximity, and she'll go from one male to the next, and then she'll go back to the first male and have another look at him, and then so she'll move between male and male, and then she'll choose to mate with the male that has the most elaborate train of the males that she actually visits.
The train, a fan of brilliant plumes that rises from the back end of each peacock, is of great interest to females. But what benefit is it to males? There are many distinctions between human males and females, but one of the most obvious is size. Men are 15% larger than women, which implies our male ancestors competed and fought for females to mate with. But what makes men bigger also makes them stronger and more aggressive. Testosterone is the very essence of masculinity. This ancient chemical is found in much the same form in all vertebrates. Among hyenas, it is the female who is larger and more aggressive. She's also the family provider, hunting in a pack with other females. The reason for her fierce behavior is literally in her blood, where she carries high levels of testosterone. By inspiring competition and choosing strong, aggressive mates, generations of women have helped create the male body. Ironically, testosterone's potent effects also depress the immune system and make men more vulnerable to infectious disease. Males also make choices and influence biology. By selecting mates who are most able to bear and raise children, men have helped shape female bodies. We look the way we do, for the most part, because our mates preferred us this way. And by being attractive to our mates, we pass along genes. Over hundreds of thousands of years, evolution has sculpted our bodies. But what about our minds? Is the way we think or feel also fashioned by genes?
One of the most exciting new ideas is that there are mental characteristics that are sexually selected rather than naturally selected. In other words, that qualities of our brains and our way of thinking and of our activities have actually been bred into us by the opposite sex. In particular, general tendency to be creative, to be witty, to be intelligent, to be good at mental tricks and so on, seems to be a big part of human courtship, which is not all about physical characteristics, it's also about mental characteristics.
At a Toronto dance club, a young man's skill at chatting up the opposite sex tells a prospective partner a lot about him, about his courage and decisiveness, his intelligence and ambition, things that cause men to rise to the tops of their professions, clues to future status. But suggesting women desire powerful, wealthy men is a Western cliché. Or is it? In the largest study of its kind, more than 10,000 men and women from 37 cultures were asked questions about what they wanted most in a mate. Were human desires the product of millions of years of evolution, or were they dictated by cultural influences? Heading the study was University of Michigan psychologist David Buss.
Women, more than men, placed a premium on mates with good financial prospects, as well as the qualities that lead to those resources over time: ambition, industriousness, older age, high social status. Men, in contrast, placed a greater premium on a mate's physical appearance or physical beauty or good looks, however it was worded, and it was worded in multiple ways, and on youth. Men universally wanted a mate who was younger than they are. Okay, and those are universal sex differences from China to Venezuela to the United States.
For our female ancestors, a male who provided resources and protected her children would have been a valuable asset. By the same token, an ancestral male who chose a young, fertile female would have had greater reproductive success. By selecting mates wisely, our ancestors gained many reproductive advantages, fixing in our genes some of the preferences and desires we carry with us today.
It's hard to define what it is about a woman that appeals to me. Things like intelligence, kindness, and honesty are very important considerations, and yet, in the flicker of an eye, I know immediately whether or not I'm attracted to her. This gut reaction, and indeed all of our sexual desires, have been adapted from a way of life lived by our ancestors millions of years ago. In our modern world, these responses can sometimes seem unreasonable and create conflict between the sexes.
Women typically have a strategy of wanting a long-term mate, wanting greater involvement, greater emotional commitment before they want to have sex. Even if it turns out as a short-term relationship, they still want the guy to have feelings for her. And so they typically want to delay on sexual intercourse, impose a longer period of courtship, see whether the guy really cares for her. And this interferes with men's strategy of desiring short-term sex. And so both sexes have strategies that interfere with each other.
In India, a wedding is a sacred union ordained by family members, priests, and astrologers. Fire plays an important role. It signifies the end of a life alone and the beginning of a new cooperative venture. But when humans, or any species for that matter, enter into a partnership, in whose best interests are they acting? Among many things, A woman offers a man an opportunity to put his genes into the next generation, while a man offers a woman a vital substance that will turn her eggs into embryos. For each gender, the other is worth exploiting. The question is how. One way may be to round up as many mates as possible. That's what a bull-elephant seal does, but only after proving he's the strongest male in the colony. When this showdown is over, one male will have exclusive access to as many as 50 receptive females. Guarding such a desirable domain is unrelenting during the breeding season, but it's the price he pays to make sure his genes have a future. Among dwarf Siberian hamsters, the male also has a strategy for dealing with competitors, although it doesn't require standing guard over a female. After copulation, the male's semen hardens into a plug at the top of the female's vagina. It's as if he's trying to buy enough time for his sperm to fertilize her eggs before she mates with another male. But sex is a potent force, and not even a hard plug will discourage some eager suitors, according to University of Manchester zoologist Robin Baker.
Species that produce these hard plugs tend to have very long, narrow penises that they work around the outside of the plug, and these species have copulation that involves a series of what are called intromissions. The male just puts his penis in, works it round, comes out, examines his penis, sees how he's getting on, then does it again. And then after he's removed the plug, or after he decides he can't remove the plug, then he inseminates the female. But a lot of the copulation is concerned with removing anything that's in there before. Now, humans don't produce a hard plug, but they do, in effect, produce a soft plug, because the seminal fluid goes very jelly-like for about 15 minutes after insemination. It sits at the top of the vagina. And there are other species with these soft plugs, and all of the species with these soft plugs have a piston-shaped penis, and this does a very similar sort of job because it fits tightly into the vagina, and by working backwards and forwards, the thrusting that goes on during copulation in such species, by working backwards and forwards, it gradually sucks this soft plug back down the vagina. And if you look at the shape of penises in these sort of species, and humans as well, they are perfectly shaped for pushing through a soft piece of material and then pulling it back out at the next pull. And so by working backwards and forwards, males can bring out anything that's already there. So we think that the shape of the human penis has evolved as an adaptation to remove soft plugs, maybe from another male, inside the female.
Competition may have shaped our anatomy, but it's also influenced many of our cultural traditions. Marriage is an institution embraced by societies around the world. One man, one woman, faithful to each other for a lifetime. At least, that's the way it's supposed to be.
One of the puzzles that there has always been is that human males, like a lot of like males of all species, produce an enormous number of sperm. The average ejaculate by a human is 300 million sperm. So, in principle, if all of those sperm were fertile, there are enough sperm there to fertilize the entire population of the United States twice. So that's a lot of sperm. But almost certainly all the sperm aren't fertile. If you look at them, especially human sperm, but gorilla sperm and a number of other species, the sperm are very different. There are at least 14 types of sperm in a human ejaculate. They have different shaped heads. You have big heads, heads so small, some have heads so small that there's no room for genetic material inside. Some have cigar-shaped heads, pear-shaped heads, two heads. Then there's sperm with two tails, short tails, coiled tails, and there's sperm with big packages of cytoplasm on the side. They look very different, and they look a very strange collection of cells. And the suggestion is that they're not all fertile, that they are doing other things.
What other things would sperm do? Robin Baker has a theory.
Some of the more geriatric, older, less mobile sperm, like the coiled tail sperm, we suggest just go into the female cervix, sit in the cervical mucus and block passage to sperm from any later male who may inseminate the female. And the other type of kamikaze sperm we suggest are the killer sperm. But there are some sperm there whose job is to roam around inside the female tract and to try and find sperm from other males and kill them.
For a better understanding of why some sperm may behave this way, we need to take a second look at our closest living relatives, the apes. Bonobos are by far the most sexually active of all primates. For them, sex is like a social glue, and bonobos use it not only to cement relationships, but to resolve conflicts. Like human females, bonobo females have sex even though they may not be ovulating. As a consequence, they often copulate with several males within a few hours. To compete under these conditions, evolution has endowed males with large testicles. By producing lots of semen, a male can fill a female's fallopian tubes and keep a competitor's sperm out. At the opposite end of the sexual spectrum is the gorilla. This is a rare mountain type found in Uganda's equatorial forest. A male who is older and dominant in the social hierarchy will have exclusive access to a harem of females, which he must defend constantly. His body size is usually enough to intimidate rivals, but sometimes physical action is called for. By preventing competitors from mating with females in his harem, he's pretty much guaranteed that all offspring carry his genes, which means he doesn't need to waste energy producing vast amounts of semen. His tiny testicles have all it takes. So if ape testes evolved to match levels of promiscuity, what can we learn about our own species? Well, compared to our primate cousins, our testes are medium-sized. We also copulate more than gorillas, but less than chimps. These two things suggest that while our immediate ancestors may not have been monogamous, they weren't as sexually active as bonobos either. Your brother or what? In fact, British researcher Robin Baker believes our bodies were adapted to deal with degrees of sperm competition, and that men can actually adjust the number of sperm released depending on whether or not they believe their mate has been unfaithful.
We did a survey of sexual behavior in British women, and we got replies from nearly 4,000 women. And one of the things we asked them was, do you have sexual partners other than your regular partner? And if so, was your last copulation with your partner or with somebody else? So the prediction was that the less time a man spends with his partner, the more sperm he should inseminate at their next copulation, because the risk of sperm competition is greater. So that was our prediction, and that's what we found. If a couple spent something like, suppose it's 3 days since their last copulation, if they had spent all of their time together, the man inseminated about 100 million sperm. But if they had spent 5% or less of their time together, then he inseminated 500 million, sort of 5 times as many. So men may not look very sophisticated when they're ejaculating, but there's something very sophisticated going on. They're adjusting the number of sperm that they inseminate.
Sperm competition may be a contest between male genes, but females are not passive partners. Evolution may have dealt women the only trump card.
We expected that the timing and occurrence of orgasm would affect the number of sperm that she retained. And this is how it turned out. If a woman has an orgasm during foreplay, any time up to a minute before the man ejaculates, she retains very few sperm. In fact, she retains slightly fewer than if she has no orgasm at all associated with the copulation. But if she has an orgasm from about the time that the male ejaculates to any time up to the flow back comes back out, then she retains relatively large numbers of sperm. The difference is from 30% if she has an orgasm during foreplay to 70% if she has an orgasm after the male has ejaculated. So it's a big difference.
But why would any female want to accept or reject sperm? It was once believed that lasting monogamy was natural for birds like these yellow warblers. Most bird species mate for life or for the duration of the breeding season, and males share equally in the responsibilities of feeding and protecting young. Then researchers like Raleigh Robertson of Queen's University came onto the scene. By taking and analyzing DNA samples of tree swallows and their offspring, he began to piece together a startling new idea.
When we started doing DNA fingerprinting, we found that this species, which I fully expected them to be very faithful monogamous birds, and the fact that we found that at least half of the nests have young which are sired by males other than the resident social mate really came as quite a shock.
So why should a female tree swallow pair up with one male only to go looking for another? Raleigh Robertson.
Natural selection is going to favor those females which leave the most offspring for succeeding generations. And so if you have a situation where a female is mated to a male that's somehow inferior, then her offspring are going to be less successful than if she has offspring which have genes from a high-quality male.
A female swallow needs a mate who will help look after her young. But what happens if all of the top-quality mates have already been taken? Is her best strategy to mate with a mediocre male and then copulate later with a genetically superior neighbor? And what about our own species? Robin Baker believes women may also have evolved strategies for obtaining favorable genes.
We looked at the orgasm pattern of women during periods of infidelity and compared that with orgasm patterns during periods of fidelity. And it was fairly clear from that comparison that when a woman does take a lover, then she favors sperm retention, the lover's sperm. She retains, her orgasm pattern is such that she retains more sperm, something like 3 times as many, we would say, we would estimate, 3 times as many sperm from the lover as from the partner. So if a woman takes the risk of being unfaithful, risks desertion, risks all of the things, risk of violence and whatever, all of the things that she risks through being unfaithful, then it seems that her main subconscious biological motive is actually to try and conceive by some other male, because she is biasing the chance of conception in favor of that male. So this is one of the bits of evidence that implies that women tend to be unfaithful for genetic reasons. They are after genes that are genes from a man that they judge subconsciously, maybe an element of consciously in that, judge to be better than their partner's genes.
All couples begin with the best of intentions, but our differing biological goals can sometimes make marriage a tough road to travel. Diane Ackerman is author of A Natural History of Love.
If you look at our ancient history, you discover very quickly that adultery was extremely natural. It was natural for the males to be adulterous because they could impregnate a lot of females and they would have a lot of offspring. It was natural for the females to be adulterous because then the males involved wouldn't know whose genes were in their child, and with any luck, everybody would want to look after and support the child. Also, there could be additional resources, maybe a little extra status or something like that, protection. So adultery was extremely natural, and we've evolved to be adulterous creatures. On the other hand, monogamy was extremely natural too, because if men and women could get together, stay together, and raise children, then the odds of having many healthy children in future generations went up and up and up. So I think what happened is that we evolved both tendencies. Not only are we creatures who believe in monogamy, teach our children that they are going to meet one person and stay married forever, but unfortunately, we also are creatures who are deeply, eternally unfaithful.
Humans have been called the sexiest animals, but our intelligence makes us unusual. We are one of the few species that has sex for pleasure and not just for reproduction. And we're the only species who can choose not to reproduce at all, whose intellect can take control over our genes. Yet as much as we consider ourselves rational beings, something we call chemistry still plays a role.
What is it that brings a man and a woman together? Love at first sight may be all right for romance novels, but in real life it just doesn't make any sense. And yet, in 1971, while lecturing to about 400 people, I was struck by a woman sitting near the front of the room. Something about her expression, her presence, even in that huge hall, moved me deeply. Exactly 1 year later, we were married. And now, after 24 years, she still affects me the same way.
Why did love evolve? I think there's only one answer to this question. That we must have been the sort of species that needed love as a peacemaking emotion to make sure that males and females could get together and have children and stay together long enough for those children to survive. If we were utterly peaceful beings, we wouldn't need the balm of love to fuse us together. So love is very important biologically. It may be our most important instinct.
Having two parents committed to a child's welfare seems to be the central reason why men and women fall in love. And that, after all, is the purpose of sex, to pass genes on to future generations and to protect offspring from new and changing diseases. Without sex, the world would be a much different place, certainly less rich and diverse, possibly unchanged from its very beginnings, but undoubtedly less fun.